Hi, I'm Peter Berexa, Chair of Erie County's Libertarian Party. I'm here today to introduce Michael G. Thomas, candidate for state representative. Michael wants to represent District 1, which includes Lawrence Park and much of the city of Erie in Harrisburg. Now, Michael, tell us about yourself.
Well, Peter, I first came to Erie in 2002 to work for the newly created TSA at Tom Ridge Field. After 3 years of federal service, I left the Department of Homeland Security to earn my BA in Intelligence Studies and my Master's in Organizational Leadership at Mercyhurst. I then spent well over a decade in the private sector, protecting critical infrastructure as an intelligence analyst.
That sounds like important work. Another important question. Mightyfine donuts or Jack Frost?
Well, my wife was raised in Edinburgh and is well entrenched on Team Mightyfine, so I'm afraid they've drafted me.
All right, excellent choice. So Michael, tell us, why are you running for state representative?
Peter, these past 3 years, we've seen so many issues in government policy and administration that it's clear Harrisburg needs more voices who are more concerned with fixing problems than with owning the other side.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the past 3 years. We're emerging from 3 years of very controversial COVID policy. Do you have anything to say about that?
People are exhausted with COVID talk, and that's a good thing because it means we won't fall for this failed lockdown mandate policies again. But people are exhausted, so I'll be brief on this subject. My concerns for COVID are that we're set up to repeat some of the same mistakes again. For instance, when I had COVID, I was denied antibody treatments in Pennsylvania. I had to travel to Ohio to receive this life-saving treatment. I later learned that Pennsylvania had a shortage of these treatments and was rationing them. Ohio had no shortage, had no rationing, and had a more advanced version of the treatment. Clearly, there's some policy in Pennsylvania that caused this shortage. But I can find no evidence that our legislature conducted any meaningful oversight to find and fix the problem. How many of our fellow Pennsylvanians did we say goodbye to because they were denied this treatment that would have saved their lives? How many of our loved ones will we say goodbye to in the future because of the next shortage? We must find and fix this problem. This is the responsibility of the legislature, and both parties seem to be too busy pointing fingers at each other to actually conduct it responsibly. We need voices in Harrisburg who aren't afraid of the party bosses, who put principle before party. We need to fix this.
Putting principle ahead of party. What a novel idea. And would that mean working across party lines?
I am a firm believer in issue coalitions. I don't care if your party animal is an elephant, a donkey, or a Targaryen dragon. I will reach across lines and work with you on an issue where we can find common ground.
I love it. Now let's talk about your campaign. Campaigning involves a lot of knocking on doors, going to festivals. Do you have any stories or people you met that really stood out to you?
I remember talking to this one young gentleman. He and his wife have some young kids, and their means are modest enough that they qualify for public assistance. He had an opportunity in a recent month to work $400 worth of overtime, and he jumped at it. And then the next month, he learned that they lost $700 of assistance because this pushed their income over a means test threshold. We need to change our means tests to be a taper, to lead to a taper instead of a cliff. This is called the poverty trap, when sacrificing and working actually destroys more in assistance than is earned in the work. With a taper, people trying to claw their way off of public assistance won't be worse off for working harder. It's not a hand up if it kicks you back down just as you're getting on your feet. I spoke with another gentleman, and I'm not going to say his district or representative, but his unemployment claim was lost for 16 weeks. Bureaucratic filings, forms, and benefits sometimes slip through the cracks, and it's your representative's job to fix that. This gentleman was upset that his representative took many calls from him over many weeks before he finally took the issue seriously. It took 4 months to get his first unemployment check because it took so long for his representative to take the issue seriously. As your representative, my first priority is constituent services. Be sure to consider how your representatives respond to these issues. Do they take 4 months to fix a benefit claim?
Wow, 4 months. Well, it sounds like you've really gotten to know the people in this district, and from all walks of life.
Yes, Peter, I've been all over the district and I've spoken to people from every walk of life.
Now, I think that listening to constituents really sets you apart as a politician, and I'm also curious, what other issues have people brought forward?
Inflation and economic opportunity are top of mind these days. We need to increase living wage opportunities and bring economic development to the region. And we need to fight the cost of living so the people of Erie can keep more of what they make. For instance, Pennsylvanians are getting crushed by the cost of prescription drugs. This doesn't make sense because frequently these drugs' patents have expired, so they shouldn't be that expensive. When I looked into this, I learned that the FDA frequently abuses its regulatory authority to keep competitors off the market. We've all heard the price gouging horror stories about off-patent medications like Daraprim or EpiPen or insulin. Pennsylvania should protect consumers from this abuse by allowing our dispensary system to produce and distribute the competing products that the FDA suppresses. Our Department of Health already regulates and monitors the licensing, production, and distribution of safe and effective off-patent cannabis pharmaceuticals. We should expand that function to include more lightly scheduled off-patent medications. Let's put Pennsylvanians to work producing these medications. And let's drive down the cost of living as the competition pushes prices down. We can use our opportunity zones to fund these product lines and ensure that Erie gets its share of the economic boost.
That may be the most concrete plan I've heard in years to actually reduce the cost of living. And as chair, when you came forward as a candidate, it really meant a lot to me how much you really seemed to care. And on top of that, it's hard to argue with breaking up a cartel. So what other issues have really resonated with people as you've been knocking on doors?
Thank you, Peter. I spoke with a gentleman whose sister joined the National Guard to learn to be an air traffic controller. And then she spent a year of her life in Iraq. She didn't enlist to be a full-time soldier. She enlisted in the National Guard to protect Pennsylvania. In this country, we really abuse our guardsmen and women. The National Guard is not meant for overseas deployment, especially without a declaration of war. We just shipped 500 Pennsylvania National Guard troops to the Middle East for a year-long deployment. That's a year where these Pennsylvanians will be unable to defend their community in crises like the 2017 blizzard that required a National Guard deployment, or bridge collapses, or riots, or floods. Defend the Guard legislation would keep National Guard troops in Pennsylvania, where they'll be available to respond to Pennsylvania crises unless Congress debates and declares war.
Our National Guard deserves better. And there's plenty to worry about on the home front, too. You know, out of curiosity, what are your thoughts on our state's tax code, for example?
Why is it that Erie has one of the poorest zip codes in the state, but one of the highest rates of property tax? Why should people who worked hard to buy their home, especially senior homeowners, have their ownership threatened by the government. I know for a fact that there are people in this district for whom property tax is a heavy burden and a threat to their independence. We need to reform and rationalize the tax code. More of the revenue should stay closer to the communities it's drawn from.
Amen to that. Michael, if somebody is interested, how can they support your campaign?
There are several ways to support this campaign. First, make your plan to vote. Do you know your polling place? Are you bringing friends? Be sure to cast your ballot, whether early or on the day. Second, tell your friends and family about this campaign. Help spread the word. My socials are at MGT4PA. My website is mgt4pa.com. Third, would you like a yard sign? We still have some left. Let your neighbors know there's a reasonable choice on the ballot. Fourth, are you excited enough to volunteer? We could use some more people to knock on doors, pass out literature, and tell the public about our policies and that there's a real choice on the ballot. Finally, we're raising money for a mailing. You can donate at mgt4pa.com. We can be reached through social media or the website, mgt4pa.com.
Now, Michael, what should we take away from this interview?
Establishment party leaders like Mitch McConnell and Nancy Pelosi have more in common with each other than with anyone you or I have ever shared Thanksgiving dinner with. They will fight harder for each other's interests than for ours, and usually at our expense. Pennsylvania ranks 45th out of 50 in economic recovery from COVID. We need change in the capitals. Vote for a fresh voice in Harrisburg, a voice focused on expanding our incomes and attacking the policies that drive inflation, on putting and keeping more money in our pockets. Vote for Libertarian Michael G. Thomas.